Can I have the attention of the class for 1 second? Thank you. Today we have an interesting lesson. We have previously discussed the horrors of World War I and how, over the course of 4 years, Europe was pushed to its limits, with a civil war in Russia, followed by the gradual collapse of the Central Powers. With the war now over, the delegates of the Entente met up in Paris and would decide on the fate of Europe. Today, we will discover the new Europe forged at this peace deal, exploring the great power motivations that shaped the continent. Starting off with the minor state of Bulgaria, they had conquered the Brusia from the Romanians during the war. They would be allowed to keep this territory, so that the new border lay across the Danube, making an offensive war between the Romanians and Bulgarians more difficult. The Serbians then would not be allowed to make any gains into Bulgaria, and for a little while it seemed like Bulgaria would get a pretty good deal. That is, until Greece got involved. Britain decided to heavily support the Greek state, and gave them not just the entirety of Thrace, but also a fat strip of southern Bulgaria too, to serve as a buffer for future Bulgarian pushes to the coast. With the fate of Bulgaria secured, we moved to Albania. They had only become an independent state in 1912, and its existence was always in question, as just about every neighboring state desired to annex parts of them. Italy, after much complaining, was allowed to turn Albania into their protectorate, directly annexing the port of Vlor in the process. But fears of a future Italian invasion of Greece would result in them gaining the defensible south. Montenegro then would form a union with the Serbians, but Serbia was unable to secure northern Albania for themselves. Then we move on to the Habsburg Balkan territories. Serbia had great designs on this region to form a huge Yugoslav state, but Italy would heavily oppose these plans. Italian pressure would see a Croatian state separate from Serbia be created, securing a lot of Dalmatia. The south, though, would pass to Italy, giving Italy an extremely strong position to dominate the Western Balkan from. But Serbia wouldn't be left in the cold, as they did get Bosnia and parts of Vojvodina. Dreams of a Yugoslavia remain, but for now, Serbia is simply Greater Serbia. Moving up, Slovenia would be united with Croatia, and plans to expand them into southern Austria are past. In fact, thanks to Italian and French pressure, Austria would lose all of these western territories in the peace deal. France wanted to strip Tyrol, giving it to Switzerland. This way, the neutral state can stand as a barrier for any aggressive war across the Alps. Italy's claimed territories in Istria and Tyrol were also granted, with even further gains to act as strategic depth, just in case a resurgent Germany would seek a reconquest. This leads us to the Hungarian portion of the empire. Slovakia would gain independence, but as a small state. The Entente delegates had decided that Hungary shouldn't be punished too harshly, arguing it's not the Hungarians that wanted this war, it was the Austrians. Similarly, a too radical expansion of Romania was rejected. They would only gain southern Transylvania, with Hungary retaining control over the northern parts. With Romania gaining Moldova, the Balkan parts of the peace deal were done. The Entente have attempted to keep Hungary, Romania and Serbia all somewhat similar in power, so that none of them can dominate the region. Still, by far most of the nations were unhappy about the new situation, and historians have put serious doubts on what the Entente were thinking with this peace deal. Anyways, onto the remainder of the Austrian portion. Czechia and Slovakia would unite, but in another questionable decision, the Sudetenland would remain with the Austrians. This provided multiple issues. If Germany were to become resurgent and unify with Austria, Czechoslovakia now has no natural defenses to stand up to their giant neighbor. Beyond that, the Sudetenland is connected very poorly to the rest of Austria, which, as we will learn next week, can cause significant administrative issues. The Poles have managed to achieve independence after the war. France especially saw in Poland the potential for a great bulwark against Russia and Germany. As such, they would be allowed to gain the entirety of Austrian Galicia, as well as disputed territories with the Czechs. With that, the Austro-Hungarian Empire has ceased to exist, and the borders created here would be amongst the most criticized in the post-war world. I'm sorry for the quick intermission, but by far most of you aren't subscribed. To keep up to date with the 2 videos I release every single week, consider doing so. Thank you. Then it's time to learn about the African peace deal, which really isn't that interesting. East Africa to Britain, Namibia to South Africa, Cameroon to France, and Togo to France as well. With that, the German African Empire was partitioned. The Pacific Peace Deal was similarly simple. Britain gained German Papua, and all other Pacific territories would be transferred to the Japanese, granting them significant influence over the oceans. Onto a more impactful peace deal, we all know that the Middle East today isn't the most peaceful in the world, and that is mostly to blame on this peace deal. France and Britain wanted to carve out their own empires in the region, but the American delegate demanded that the promises to the Arabs be kept, causing the creation of a unified Hashemite Arab state. But that is not all, as Yemen and Kurdistan were also added to the nation. In retrospect, it should have been clear that such a sudden unification of this diverse of a region was a bad idea. But at the time, the American president really believed that he was doing the world a favor. So, things were already looking bleak for the Turks, losing half of their empire. But it can get far worse. After the Turks, under Mustafa Kemal, kept fighting, rejecting the first peace deal, the Entente became determined to destroy the Ottoman state. While proposals like an Italian colony in Anatolia were rejected, in the east a major Armenian state would be created, retribution for Turkish atrocities during the war. Then, Pontus had declared unification with Greece, and with Entente backing, the Greeks marched into Constantinople, crossing the Bosphorus and creating a land bridge to Pontus. Finally, the Greeks would march down the western coastline. Even the biggest Greek nationalist wouldn't have been able to predict such a whopping success for Greece. The Ottomans would obviously collapse during this ordeal, replaced with a struggling Turkish Republic. This moves us onto the Russian Empire. Having collapsed into civil war between the Red and White armies, the Entente would push extremely hard to have the White forces emerge victorious, managing to re-establish the Russian Tsardom, with Nicholas II returning as the absolute monarch of Russia. Next week, we will learn what he turns Russia into after his return. Either way, the sheer amount of support that Britain gave to Russia would deplete their treasury, and would largely fuel Britain's withdrawal from world politics after the war. But the return wasn't simple for Nicholas. While he leads Russia again, Russia is now significantly smaller. Japan has sponsored a democratic counter-regime in the east, as well as a breakaway Siberian state. Suddenly, Russia has lost access to the Pacific. But it gets worse. The Trans-Siberian Railway was constructed to ensure Russia can easily access their eastern territory. But, again thanks to Japanese interference, the Mongolians would march north significantly, gaining control over this key railway and becoming a strong Japanese ally. Russia would need to struggle greatly to restore eastern relevance. In Central Asia, various independence movements have succeeded, but they quickly realized that they cannot hope to stand up to foreign invaders by themselves. So once again, with Japanese influence, a Central Asian Federation was set up, allying itself to Japan as well. These developments would fuel Japan's future focus on dominating continental Asia, investing into their army rather than navy, and mostly giving up on their dreams to destroy the European empires. But I am getting ahead of myself. That is for next week's lesson. Let's move on to the Caucasus. Much like in Central Asia, several new independent states emerge, none of which could resist Russian reconquest. So they too united into a federation. Still, their future also looks bleak. Religious conflicts immediately played up the instability of the new state. To make matters worse, unlike Mongolia and the Central Asian Federation, the Caucasus Union has no great power backer. The fact that this state collapses shouldn't be a shock to anyone. Onto the western territories, the most important ones lost by Russia, Finland had declared independence and seized significant eastern territories. In the Baltics, 3 new states came into existence. But not for long. Estonia would request integration into the Kingdom of Finland. The Kingdom of Finland itself had trouble finding themselves a king and eventually landed on King Gustav of Sweden. Reluctantly, the Swedish government accepted the new Swedish-Finnish unity, bringing Sweden back to the European scene. Then the Poles conquered major territories from the Russians in the west, before also conquering Lithuania, declaring a reformed Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. But that's not all. The Poles would significantly support the Ukrainians, allowing them to achieve independence and secure territory up to the Black Sea. This brings us back to Europe. Before we get to the final Central Power member, a quick detour to Ireland. The South had declared independence, and with American pressure, Britain would respect this Irish declaration, even being forced to cede the North as well, making Ireland fully independent, but also worsening relations between Britain and America. That finally leads us to Germany itself. The Entente were united in a common goal. Germany must be punished. Starting in the west, the French got all of Alsace-Lorraine, completing their goal for the war. Belgium and Luxembourg then both expanded as well, with France pushing for a common defense union in the west, now with more strategic depth. Up north then, the Kiel Canal gives Germany control over the Baltic Sea. To prevent this, Denmark was not just expanded up to it, but all the way into Holstein. The Danish king personally opposed this land transfer, arguing that Denmark did not need all of these Germans in their nation, but the British and French forced Denmark to accept the land grant. Then finally, the French did try to push for a complete partition of Germany, but the other Entente considered this to go too far. The bulk of Germany would be respected. Still, some changes in the east were necessary. Poland needed access to the Baltic Sea, and so was awarded the Polish Strip. France argued Danzig should go to Poland too, but Britain and the US reasoned that Poland can also get naval access through Lithuania, which would also make Lithuania a more important region that Poland cannot just ignore and oppress. Germany would be allowed to keep control over Königsberg and Danzig. But in the south, something strange happened. An independent Prussian state was created just there. This was an idea from France, preventing Germany from stationing forces there, meaning Poland doesn't have to worry about a two-front war when they go to war with Germany. Still, critics, correctly, maintained that this Prussian state will always seek to reunite with Germany at the earliest opportunity. Finally, the Poles would achieve modest expansion into Silesia on the basis of nationality. This only leaves southern Germany to be discussed, and with the Entente still paranoid about the potential of a German union with Austria, an independent Bavarian state would be created as well, to prevent such an easy unification. And that's it. We have now discussed the entire peace deal, and the new Europe is created. But it's very clearly a Europe riddled with issues, and this status quo is most certainly not lasting. In next week's class, we shall explore how this Europe exploded in on itself. But for now, I will thank you all for showing up, I will note down your attendance, and if you all took notes, I'm sure you will get a great grade when I do the quiz 2 weeks from now.